The Missouri River in the state of Montana. This is one of the best stretches to go fly fishing for the rainbow and brown trout that inhabit the great river. Driving north from Helena, the state capital, on Interstate 15, we come to the small town of Craig, Montana. Chris, Jerry, and Karen are waiting for us in the Missouri River Trout Shop and Lodge. In Craig, there's everything an angler needs to spend a great vacation on the banks of the famous river. Warm hospitality, good cooking, and the small store that sells everything a fly tyer needs and offers plenty of good professional advice. The Missouri Trout Shop also rents out tackle, as well as the Mackenzie boats that carry anglers downriver into an unspoiled environment full of wildlife and stunning views. The wide, fast-flowing river is well stocked with strong, aggressive trout and provides an exhilarating venue for adventure after adventure for anglers fishing from inflatable dinghies, float tubes, and boats. The section we're interested in lies between Wolf Creek Bridge and Craig Bridge. During the summer months, the Missouri is home to millions of insects, ephemerals of every species of pale morning dun or pale yellow. Early in the morning, tricos abound. While during the day and the evening, brown caddis hatch by the millions. Our friends in the Missouri Trout Shop show us several imitations that are ideal for summer fishing on the Missouri River. We'll be fishing in several splendid pools that can be accessed from the road, and we'll work our way downriver with Alberto SALVINI, a professional angler from Italy. Alberto starts the day by exploring a section where trout are rising to tricos carried on the current. He attaches his fly to his 6X tippet with a classic clinch knot. Here's a useful trick. Since he's using dry flies, Alberto wipes the grease off the leader with a tuft of weed so that it sinks slightly and won't be noticed by the trout that seem to be pretty selective. There's a lot of fish activity on the surface. Alberto spends a couple of minutes studying the flow of the currents and then makes his first cast, mending to prevent the fly being dragged downstream. Concentration must be 100%. Because a trout could rise to the imitation at any time. Immediately, the fish takes several meters of line as it heads into the main current. Alberto holds the rod high, working the reel with an expert's touch. Missouri trout are tough fighters and must be worn down without allowing them to get into the banks of weed on the riverbed. Trout in rivers this wide tend to use the current by swimming sideways into it to increase their resistance. Slowly but surely, patiently, Alberto plays his catch, reeling in line each time it seems to tire, taking special care because he's using a thin tippet with a tiny imitation. It's a pretty big fish. A final flurry of energy, and the trout's ready for the net. A splendid rainbow, some 18 inches long. Carefully, Alberto takes out the hook and releases the fish back into its habitat.
I will be tying a Tricos Spinner, and to start with we tie onto the shank of the hook towards the bend in the back. Next, I will dub a very small bit of black dubbing to make a ball at the very bend of the hook. This is to split the tail of the trico, and for the tail I'll use microfibbits. 4 microfibbits should be plenty. And then I'll tie the microfibbits on approximately 2 hook shank lengths. The trico has a very long tail, and And the microfibbets work really well for the tail. So we tie them on. And then to split the tail, I simply pull one over one side and one over the other, wrap back with the thread, and then adjust the tails as need be so that they're along the sides. I'll trim my excess microfibbet. Now we'll dub the body. While you're dubbing, using care not to ruin the split on the tail. Dub about 3/4 of the way up the body, and then I'm going to tie a wing which has pearl flesh and antron mixed together. And I start by tying it crosswise over the hook, and then after a couple wraps, pulling it back the other way. I'll add some dubbing for the thorax. What we'll do is we'll make 1, 2 wraps over the wing to create a thorax, then wrapping forward to make a head on it. Tying it off. And then we'll trim the wings off by just pulling them up. They're approximately clipped off at hook shank length. And we have the Tricos Spinner.
A section of the same pool where the water is not so choppy. Trout are feeding on a wide variety of insects, catching them with impressive regularity. There are a lot of caddis on the surface, but the trout seem to be focusing on tiny green emergers. Casting a fly in calm water is only apparently easier than casting in choppy water. In this case, the leader must curve upstream so that the fly isn't dragged downriver and the trout isn't scared off by the sight of the line. The trout dives trying to break free of the fly, and the leader gets coated with weed that threatens to break it. In this situation, it's essential to hold the rod high and work with the reel and the drag, playing the trout, ready to reel in line the moment it stops, and, if necessary, trying to clean off the weed so that the added weight won't tear off the hook. Just when the fish seems to have had enough, it suddenly darts away, apparently as strong as ever. Alberto lets it go, giving it plenty of line, before starting slowly and patiently to reel it in. A last burst of resistance, and the fish is in the net. It's not that big, but it's still full of energy. Carefully, Alberto removes the hook and releases the fish.
I'm Jerry Lappier with the Missouri River Trout Shop in Craig, Montana, and I'm going to tie a blue wing olive cripple, a very common pattern that we use on the Missouri River. We start with a size 14 dry fly hook. The first thing you do is tie a little bit of thread on your hook near the bend of the hook and clip your thread. Then you use Zelon, which is this material here. Now I've already taken a little off, and I use it in a small clip so you can control the material more closely. Get a little wet so you can control it, and tie on just a small amount near the base or the bend of the hook. Then just clip off a small amount. Then you use a rabbit and Antron dubbing mixed together, just a small amount, and try to taper your body up towards the eye of the hook, leaving about 25% of the hook shank left. Then you take a small amount of any kind of dark colored deer hair, and you tie it in close to the tips of the deer hair, making sure that it's on there fairly tight. Then clip off the tips like so. Then normally I will tie a little bit in front of the hair to make sure that it can't slide around on you, and then back over like so and around the post. Then go back over the post, making sure that the deer hair is cocked forward. Trim off this little extra. Then you take we use saddles, make your tying much easier. Strip back a little bit and tie it on in front of the deer hair post. Then take your saddle, wrap it around the post until you have a nice full parachute, approximately 4 or 5 turns. Then tie it off in the front of the hook, trying not to get too many fibers trapped by the eye. Clip off the hackle and use a whip finisher, securing it with 1 knot and hanging the thread over. Pull the post back, trying not to trap too many of your hackle fibers over the eye of the hook. Clip your thread on the bottom of the eye, and then I find it easier to get the right size post by removing it from the vise, holding it in front of you, and then adjusting. You want your post to be approximately the size or the length of the shank of the hook, and just trim it in one shot if possible to get a nice clean looking fly. And when you fish this fly, you put just a little bit of floatant on that post and let the body hang down in the surface film. Very effective fly on the Missouri.
This section of the Missouri River is dotted with numerous islands. Between the bank and the islands, the current is slower, and in August, the water is low enough for wading. Several trout are rising in the middle of an arm of the river where banks of weed break the surface. Alberto works slowly downstream, trying to cast the fly so that it's not dragged along on the current. To do this, he makes slow, curved reach casts. The trout dives into the current. Alberto gives it plenty of line to avoid breaking the leader, working with the reel and the drag. The fish fights with stubborn determination, gaining several yards of line. Alberto is obliged to walk downstream, reeling in as he goes. In this kind of situation, it's essential to keep the rod high and make sure that the line is always at the right angle. Another brief skirmish, and the trout surrenders. It's not a big fish, but it's still full of energy. Alberto picks it up with wet hands to avoid rubbing off the protective mucus. Now all that remains is to remove the hook. The barbless hook simplifies this operation. Then, gently, Alberto releases his catch into the water. A second to recover its strength, and then it darts away.
My name is Karen Lappier. I'm with the Missouri River Trout Shop. I'm going to be tying a beaded pheasant tail nymph. It'll be on a number size 14 hook, and it is with a bead. First, you want to put on your thread. With the size 14 hook, you're going to want the longest pheasant tail fibers that you can get, because you're going to need to build your body up. The ends being perfectly even does not matter with this fly. You can tie on the end. You want it to overlap the end of your hook a bit. You can pull it up if you have too much. Pull your thread around to the front of your fibers. Grab a piece of medium copper wire, preferably, and tie your wire onto the hook shank. Working your thread up to the front, you want to stop behind the bead. Your bead is not going to be at the eye of the hook. It's going to be back a little bit. Then you can just let your bobbin hang loosely while you wrap the fibers up. Remembering to taper it a bit right before the bead. Drop your thread over and bring it around to the front. Now you want to work your wire up, leaving a rib up the body of the fly. You can either cut your wire or just break it with your finger. At this point, if you just take your thread and do a half hitch, you can pull it up over the top of your bead and half hitch it again. You want to make sure your thread is left on the top of your bead. And then you're going to pull the pheasant tail fibers over the top of the bead. Clip the remaining. At this point, If your fibers aren't long enough, you need to add more pheasant tail for your legs that are going to go out the side. Tie on some new. Pull them to the desired length. Your legs should go out along the side of the bead. Clip off your extra materials. You're going to want to secure the ends of the pheasant tail fibers down. Finish off the head of your fly. Double whip finish helps.
Alberto is fishing for a group of trout feeding near some banks of weed. In conditions like this, the best technique is to cast downstream, paying out line as the current carries the fly towards the target trout. Another strike. Another jumping, fighting rainbow. It's essential to keep the trout close to the surface, preventing it having enough line to dive into the banks of weed on the riverbed. This is easier with rainbow because, unlike brown trout, which invariably dive for the bottom, rainbow prefer to fight on the surface. All the same, the riverbed plays a key role in the type of defensive system used by the trout, and it's always better to stop them going for the bottom. Missouri trout always put up a good fight, struggling to the end. The answer is to force them into shallow water. When the catch is this aggressive, it's wise to stay alert in order not to lose it in a final flurry of resistance, with the net always ready. Preferably, the net should have a fine mesh which doesn't hurt the fish. It's a pretty big fish. Gently, Alberto removes the hook and releases the trout into the water.
Okay, I'm going to be tying a Caddis pupa. To start with, we tie the thread around the shank of the hook near the back. Now I'll be tying some copper wire in for the ribbing material. And then I'll take some Antron blended with hare's ear for the body of the pupa and dub this very loosely so the body is translucent. Then I'll wrap the copper wire around the body. Tie off the copper wire. Bust that off. Then for the head of the pupa, I tie in a seal clone dubbing mixture in a rust color very loosely. And we'll tie off the head. Whip finish it. And then I like to tease the hair out a bit. And this is what you come up with. Fishing it in the surface film of the water looks much like the Caddis pupa.
Several large trout feeding on nymphs and emergers. One can spend hours watching these marvelous creatures rising constantly to the surface that is literally carpeted by millions of insects carried on the current. When summer comes and the level of the water drops, groups of trout enjoy the shade near the riverbanks. These are Missouri River rainbow trout. This splendid example rises rhythmically to feed on the surface insects. Alberto casts across the river, allowing the fly to float on the current, trying to match the trout's rhythmical rising. In this situation, it's best to go for fish more downriver in order not to scare away the whole shoal. Immediately, the trout darts towards the main current. As he reels in, Alberto concentrates on keeping the trout close to the surface. Then he tries to force it into shallower water. Again and again, the fish tries to head into the middle of the river. The tippet is too thin to force it too much. Alberto tries to place himself between the trout and the open river, forcing the fish into shallower water where the current is slower. The trout seems to tire. Another flurry of resistance, and it's in the net. The fish has swallowed the fly, and Alberto has to use his pincers to remove the hook. Luckily, it's a barbless hook, which makes this task a lot easier. A few seconds to recover its strength, and the fish returns to its natural habitat.
I'm Karen Lappier from the Missouri River Trout Shop in Craig, Montana. I'm going to be tying a pink scud, which is like the shrimp we have here in the river, and I'll be tying it on a size 16 nymph hook. First, you want to tie on your thread. Add a little bit of pink marabou for your tail fibers. Next thing is you want to add your wire A medium copper wire works fine for the rib material on this. You want to tie your wire down secure to your hook shank, and then your piece of pink scud back. Some pink rabbit dubbing for your body of your fly. You're going to want this a little spiky so it doesn't have to be dubbed on very tight. Then you'll be building up the body of your fly. Pull your scud back material over the top and secure that down at the head of your hook, eye of your hook. And then your copper ribbing. Break or cut your wire, and you're going to want to cover your wire with your thread. Finish off the head of your fly. Double whip finish helps. You have a dubbing teaser to help bring the fibers out from underneath your rib so you have the movement in the water. And then just pull your fibers off at the end. And this resembles the shrimp found here on the Missouri.
The Missouri River offers majestically beautiful views, presenting nature at its best. For anglers, it's an unforgettable experience to fish in such a magnificent environment so rich in fauna. On warm summer afternoons, the trout become more and more frenetic, and even the pelicans that inhabit the river get into the act. Trout after trout rise to the bait, be it a nymph, or an imitation of an emerger, or a dry fly. Every time, the exceptional strength and aggressiveness of the Missouri rainbows tests the angler's ability to the limit. The insects continue to hatch. The water is literally bubbling. But with such a large quantity of insects to choose from, the trout becomes selective. It's essential to be highly concentrated and do everything exactly right if you want to get a strike. One technique is to make reach casts to present the fly to the trout without them noticing the tippet. Finally, a trout takes a fancy to our fly. Finally, this splendid rainbow is in the net. Alberto removes the hook and releases the trout into the water.
I'm Chris Goodman with the Missouri River Trout Shop, and I will be tying a spent caddis, which is an exclusive fly that we tie at our shop here on the Missouri River in Craig, Montana. First, I'll be tying onto the shank of the hook with the thread. Then I'll use a piece of pearl crystal flash. Now I'll apply a little Antron hare's ear dubbing in a tan color, as you see, for the body material. Now I'll wrap the crystal flash around the body. Let's clip it off. Now I'll take a little Swiss straw and we'll tie it in for the wing material of the caddis. And then I just trim the ends off as I see fit. Usually I use 1 shank and a half for the length of the wing. Now I'll be tying the head material, which is a seal clone dubbing. It gives it a real spiky look and floats very well in the water. And then we'll just whip finish it. Now you have a wonderful representation of the spent caddis.
A breeze is blowing. Several trout are rising near the bank where a slight current provides them with plenty of food. Alberto makes several casts at an angle, trying to drop the fly in front of the fish. As the trout rises to the fly, Alberto hooks it with a sideways motion instead of vertically, since he's fishing downstream. He gains control of the situation, holding the rod by the reel, working the spool with his fingers to contain the fish's lunges. The trout seems to be tiring. Alberto reels in the line, forcing the fish into shallower water. Now the fish is back in the middle of the river again, fighting strongly. Alberto moves towards the center of the current, forcing the fish to head against the flow. A final flurry, and the fish is in the net. As soon as the small hook is removed, the trout is released back into its natural element.
I'm going to tie for you a Madam X hopper. You start by tying the thread on the shank close to the bend of the hook. Then you take red deer hair, which I've already clipped some off and have put in a stacker. You only need a little bit. This is just for the tail. And a very short tail. Once again, I wrap up in front, prevent the hair from spinning. Then you take some closed cell foam and clip it at a slight angle on the end, just to tie it down. It makes it easier. Tie it back. Then create a small loop. You only need a couple of turns just to hold it in place. Then you can use some waste saddle hackle or a poor quality cock neck feather and tie it down to the shank of the hook, working your way back to where you tied the loop with the foam. Then tricky part is to grab the foam very close to where it's tied in and pull it tight. Then loosen up on the foam so you get nice, even wraps with the foam so it does not look bulky near the tail. Clip it short, then wrap your hackle twice by the loop, and then just palmer your hackle forward till you reach the hook shank. Then you tie it off. Next step is your underwing, which we use fly sheet. This is a strip that I've already cut off of this fly sheet, and you clip the end at an angle for the wing on the hopper. You make the wing slightly longer than the hook shank, so it extends just beyond the tail of the hopper, the red tail. Tie it securely. Then you take some deer hair, light or dark deer hair, it depends upon you. Use quite a bit. Clear out the under hair, and once again, put it in the stacker. Stack the hair till it is even. And let's see here. Turn the hair the opposite direction so the tips of the hair are pointing towards the front of the hook. Then, with the thread very close to the eye, you have to guess, or you have to estimate where the hair is going to be once you fold it back, because you're creating a bullet head. And you tie it down and let it spin slightly. Clip off the excess hair. And wrap it a little bit more just to make sure your hair stays on nice. Then take your hair and fold it back, top and sides. Pull it back to create your bullet head. Then it's time for the rubber legs. Take some rubber legs and fold them back. Tie them to the top of the hook. Somewhat loosely, just so you have them on there. Clip your loop and pull the rubber legs down to the sides of the hopper. Secure them a little further. Then one loop And then pull your thread through the hair of your bullet head to the eye. Whip finisher. Push your legs forward, clip them to size, take your legs to the back. They should be approximately as long as the wing. Clip, clean off the excess on the front. You can spin your vise, and then you clip off the deer hair off the bottom of your hopper. Then take the hopper out of the vise, turn it over, clip your hackles till they're to the length of the hook shank, and you have your completed Madam X hopper.
Today, we'll be going downriver with Alberto into the section between Wolf Creek Bridge and Craig Bridge. Alberto heads downstream in a Kingfisher. This is the ideal boat for these waters. Fast, light, and maneuverable, and equipped with a small anchor so that the angler can stop whenever he likes. It offers an excellent alternative to the classic Mackenzie as long as you don't intend to travel the river in a group. Alberto sights trout rising for Caddis in the middle of the river. He throws out the anchor, casts, strike. It's not a big fish, but its energetic resistance does credit to the Missouri rainbow. The advantage of fishing from a boat is, as I said before, that you can stop where you like, especially in places that can't be accessed from the road. Naturally, in places like this, the trout are more tranquil, but this doesn't necessarily mean an abundance of catches, since all Missouri trout are notoriously selective and oblige the angler to use all his expertise and casting skill. At last, we get a strike. Alberto uses a 5X tippet that gives him more control over the fish as it instinctively heads for deep water. It's a splendid example that will soon be released like the others back into its natural element. Sailing a river like the Missouri offers endless opportunities to admire the savage beauty of its banks. We get another strike close to a small island in the middle of the river. In water up to his waist, Alberto has cast his imitation into choppy water with immediate results. The trout tries to escape against the current, but after a short fight, it ends up in the net. Another splendid rainbow. Some anglers like to fish the Great River using a float tube. Meanwhile, Alberto has found another pool that immediately turns out to be productive. Red cliffs tower above the railroad running along the shore of the river that grows ever wider and more imposing. As we travel downriver, we have plenty of time to admire the scenery and the many wild animals that seem to take the presence of people for granted. At last, Craig Bridge looms in the distance. Houses and trailers begin to dot the banks. Right under the bridge is the landing where we'll tie up. Good food awaits us at the Missouri River Trout Shop and Lodge. we'll be stopping over to discuss trout, flies, and the majestic Missouri River. The Missouri River is the ideal location for people who appreciate nature at its very best and look forward to fishing for the best and most aggressive rainbow trout in the state of Montana.